The grand chamber floated in the darkness of space, a massive crystal structure orbiting a dying red star. Inside, representatives from 847 species sat in rows that climbed toward a ceiling lost in shadow. Some breathed oxygen, some breathed methane, some did not breathe at all. But all of them had come to witness history. Ambassador Zethkon rose from his seat at the center of the chamber. He stood 12 feet tall, his body covered in black armor that was not armor at all, but his own shell, grown from birth and harder than most metals. His eyes, dozens of them, reflected the light of floating holographic displays. His mandibles clicked together as he prepared to speak, and the sound echoed through the silent hall. The Valorian hegemony had ruled 3 spiral arms of the galaxy for 60,000 years. They had crushed rebellions. They had ended civilizations. They had turned entire worlds into glass when those worlds refused to submit. In all that time, they had never lost a war. They had never even come close. Zethkon looked out at the assembled species, most of whom paid tribute to his people, and he felt the comfortable weight of absolute power. "The Galactic Concord recognizes a new species," he announced. His voice was translated into 1,000 languages simultaneously. Designation: Homo sapiens. Origin: Sol 3, a small world in an unremarkable system at the edge of the Orion Arm. A hologram appeared beside him, showing a rotating image of Earth, blue oceans, green continents, white clouds. It looked peaceful, soft, harmless. "First contact was established 16 standard cycles ago," Zethkon continued. "Our emissary offered them the standard terms: tribute, submission, and integration into the hegemony. In exchange, they would receive protection and access to galactic trade routes." He paused, and his mandibles clicked again. This time, the sound carried something like anger. "They refused." A murmur passed through the chamber. Refusal was unusual. Most species understood their place in the galaxy within moments of meeting the Valorians. Those who did not understand were taught quickly. Not only did they refuse, Zethkon said, they laughed. Their leader, a creature called the Secretary General, told our emissary that humanity does not bow to anyone. He said this while standing in a building made of glass and steel that our smallest warship could destroy in seconds. He said this while his species still burns dead plants to power their vehicles. The murmur became chittering laughter from a dozen different species. The Valorians in the chamber made sounds of contempt. Even the tribute species, who had learned to hide their hatred, allowed themselves small smiles. The humans sounded like fools. "Therefore," Zethkon announced, raising one clawed appendage, "I invoke the right of subjugation. The Valorian hegemony formally declares its intent to bring Sol 3 and its inhabitants under our control. As is tradition, we offer the humans one final opportunity to surrender before we begin." He turned toward the observation gallery, where a single human sat among the empty seats reserved for species not yet part of the Concord. Dr. Elena Vasquez was 53 years old. She had gray hair pulled back in a messy bun, reading glasses perched on her nose, and a coffee stain on her jacket that she had not noticed for 2 days. She was a xenanthropologist, which meant she studied alien cultures. She had been sent to observe the Concord because no one important wanted the job. Earth's governments were still arguing about whether the aliens were real or an elaborate hoax. Now every eye in the chamber was looking at her. Elena looked up from her notes. She looked at the hologram of Earth, then at the massive insectoid creature waiting for her response. She thought about the message she had received from home that morning, the one that told her the world's governments had finally stopped arguing and started panicking. "You have been offered the mercy of surrender," Zethkon said. "Your species may avoid destruction if you submit now. What is your answer?" Elena took off her reading glasses and cleaned them on her stained jacket. She thought about her daughter, who was probably in a bunker somewhere by now. She thought about her ex-husband, who had always said she worked too much. She thought about all the science fiction movies she had watched as a child, the ones where humanity came together to face alien threats. "I'm going to need to make a call," she said. The chamber erupted in laughter. It came from everywhere, a wave of clicking and hissing and barking sounds that meant amusement in 100 different languages. The tiny human, the soft little mammal with no claws and no armor and no venom, wanted to make a phone call. Zethkan's mandibles spread in what passed for a smile among his species. "You have one rotation of your planet. Then the fleet arrives." Elena nodded slowly. She gathered her notes, stood up, and walked toward the exit. Every species in the chamber watched her go. This small, fragile creature in her stained jacket, representing a world that did not know it was about to die. As she reached the door, she paused and looked back at Zethkan. "Ambassador," she said, "can I ask you something? Just for my research." Zethkan was amused enough to allow it. "Speak. In your 60,000 years of conquest, have you ever fought a species that knew it couldn't win?" The question seemed to confuse him. Why would any species fight if they knew they could not win? That would be illogical. That would be wasteful. That would be... He searched for the word. Insane. Elena smiled. It was a small smile, tired and sad, but something in it made a few of the nearest species shift uncomfortably in their seats. "Yeah," she said. "That's what I thought you'd say." She left the chamber. The laughter continued behind her, echoing off the crystal walls as the galaxy celebrated the coming destruction of another primitive species. In her small quarters aboard the observation station, Elena made her call. The connection to Earth took 11 minutes. When it finally went through, she found herself looking at a room full of generals and politicians, all of them pale and frightened. "They've declared war," she said. "We have about 30 hours before their fleet arrives. Can we negotiate?" Someone asked. "No. Can we surrender?" Elena thought about Zethkan's smile, about the casual contempt in his voice, about the tribute species she had seen in the chamber. Slaves. All of them slaves. "We could," she said, "but I don't think we will." On the screens behind the generals, she could see news broadcasts from around the world. Panic, chaos, fear, but also something else. Something that made her think of her grandfather's stories about old wars. People were getting angry. "Tell them to get ready," Elena said. "Tell them everything I've learned about the Valorians. And tell them..." She paused, thinking of the right words. "Tell them we've been waiting for something like this our whole lives. We just didn't know it." The call ended. Elena sat alone in her quarters, looking out at the stars, and she wondered if humanity had any idea what was coming. She suspected they didn't. She also suspected it wouldn't matter. Fleet Commander Vrex then stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched Earth grow larger on the view screen. He had conquered 14 worlds in his career. He had burned cities and broken armies, and accepted the surrender of kings and presidents and hive mothers. He knew exactly what to expect. First would come the panic. The primitive species always panicked when they saw the fleet arrive. Their communication channels would fill with screaming and crying and desperate prayers to whatever gods they believed in. Then would come the futile resistance, a few weapons fired at ships they could not hope to damage. Then would come the surrender, the begging, the offers of tribute that should have been made from the beginning. Vrex then expected to be home within a week. "Report," he commanded. His sensor officer, a younger Valorian named Kethra, studied her displays with growing confusion. "Commander, I am detecting nothing." "Nothing?" "No communication signals. No distress calls. No military mobilization." Kethra adjusted her instruments. The planet appears to be silent. Rex then clicked his mandibles in annoyance. Their technology is primitive. Perhaps our sensors cannot detect their signals. No, Commander. I am detecting their satellites. I am detecting power signatures from their cities. But there is no communication between them. It is as if they have all stopped talking at once. This was unusual. Rex then had studied the humans during the journey. They were a species that never stopped talking. They had built a global communication network specifically so they could argue with each other at all hours of the day and night. Silence was not in their nature. "Launch reconnaissance drones," he ordered. "I want visual confirmation of their major population centers." The drones launched from the belly of the Eternal Dominion and streaked toward Earth's surface. Rex then waited, watching the view screen, feeling the first small seed of unease plant itself in his stomach. The images came back. 20 minutes later, the cities were empty, not destroyed, not burning, not filled with refugees fleeing in terror. Simply empty. The streets of New York and Tokyo and London and Moscow showed no movement except for stray animals wandering past abandoned vehicles. The buildings stood intact, their windows dark, their doors closed. "Where are they?" Rex then demanded. 7 billion life forms do not simply vanish. Kethra worked frantically at her station. "Commander, I am detecting massive underground heat signatures beneath every major population center. They appear to have moved underground. In 3 months? That is impossible. Excavation on that scale would require decades of preparation. The structures appear to be pre-existing, Commander. They were already built. The humans simply occupied them." Rex then stared at the empty cities on the view screen. The humans had known they could not fight the fleet in open battle, so they had hidden. They had buried themselves like insects, like prey animals fleeing into their burrows. He should have felt contempt. Instead, he felt something else. Something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt uncertain. "The humans have written extensively about this scenario," his intelligence officer reported, scrolling through captured data. "They call it a bunker mentality. They have been preparing for catastrophic events throughout their entire recorded history. Nuclear war, asteroid impacts, disease outbreaks, climate disasters. They have constructed underground shelters for all of these possibilities. Why?" Rex then asked. "Why would any species spend resources preparing for events that may never happen?" The intelligence officer hesitated. "Their history suggests that catastrophic events happen to them regularly, Commander. They appear to view extinction-level threats as normal." Rex then considered this. On his homeworld, the Valorians had evolved as the dominant predators. Nothing had threatened them in millions of years. They had never needed to hide from anything. The humans, it seemed, had evolved hiding from everything. "Send the ground forces," Rex then ordered. "If they want to hide in holes, we will dig them out." The landing craft descended through Earth's atmosphere, carrying 10,000 Valorian soldiers. They were the finest warriors in the galaxy, each one trained from birth to kill. Each one equipped with weapons that could level buildings and armor that could stop any projectile the humans might throw at them. They landed in the empty streets of a city called Chicago. The buildings rose around them like silent monuments, their windows reflecting nothing but clouds. The soldiers moved forward in perfect formation, scanning for threats. Finding none, then they saw the message. It was painted on the side of a building in crude Valorian script. The letters large enough to see from blocks away. Someone had taken the time to learn their language, to write a message specifically for them. "Welcome to Earth. Mind." The mines. The first explosion killed 30 soldiers. The second killed 20 more. By the time the Valorians understood what was happening, They had lost nearly 100 warriors to devices buried beneath the streets. The humans had not just hidden themselves. They had turned their cities into traps. Rexton watched the casualty reports come in and felt that seed of unease grow into something larger. He had expected panic and desperation. He had expected primitive weapons and futile resistance. He had not expected this cold, calculated silence. "Commander," Kethra said, her voice strange, "I am detecting activity in their underground structures. They appear to be manufacturing something. Weapons? Unknown. But the heat signatures suggest industrial production on a massive scale. Whatever they are building a lot of it." Rexton looked at the view screen, at the quiet blue planet that had seemed so harmless from space. The humans were not panicking. They were not surrendering. They were not even fighting, not really. They were waiting. "What are they waiting for?" he asked, not expecting an answer. From somewhere deep beneath Chicago, a signal began to broadcast. It was a human voice, speaking in heavily accented Valorian, and it carried across every frequency the fleet was monitoring. "Good morning," the voice said. "This is the Terran Resistance. We apologize for the inconvenience. Your invasion is very important to us. Please remain on the surface, and a representative will be with you shortly. Estimated wait time is however long it takes for you to realize you made a mistake." The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, Rexton looked at his officers. He saw confusion on their faces. He saw the beginnings of fear. "Find them," he ordered. "Find them and destroy them." But even as he gave the command, he could not shake the feeling that the hunters had somehow become the hunted. On Earth's surface, the empty cities waited in silence. Beneath them, 7 billion humans were getting ready. 6 months into the war, the Valorian High Command received a report from Fleet Commander Rexton. It was not a victory report. It was not a request for reinforcements, though those had been sent 3 times already. It was something no Valorian commander had ever submitted in 60,000 years of conquest. It was a warning. The document was titled Operational Anomalies of the Human Theater, and it would later become required reading at every Valorian military academy. Not as a guide to victory, but as a reminder of what happens when you underestimate your prey. The first anomaly was simple. Humans did not surrender. This was not an exaggeration or a figure of speech. Valorian soldiers reported engaging human fighters who continued attacking after losing limbs. They reported humans who crawled through mud and fire with their intestines trailing behind them just to reach a weapon. They reported a human who had been shot 17 times and still managed to detonate an explosive device, killing himself and 12 Valorian soldiers. "They do not value their own lives," a battalion commander wrote. "They value victory. They value revenge. They value making us pay for every meter of ground we take. I have never seen anything like it." The second anomaly was stranger. Humans fought harder for each other than for themselves. Valorian soldiers understood self-preservation. It was basic biology. When a battle was lost, you retreated to fight another day. But humans would charge into certain death to rescue a wounded comrade. They would sacrifice entire squads to recover a single body. They had a word for this that did not translate properly into Valorian, or Brotherhood. A Valorian scout team observed a human unit pinned down by superior firepower. Instead of surrendering, one human soldier ran directly into the line of fire, drawing attention away from his companions. He was killed almost instantly. In the time it took to kill him, his companions escaped. The scout team leader wrote in his report, "He died so that others might live. I do not understand why any creature would do this. I do not think I want to understand." The third anomaly was the most disturbing. Humans adapted. Valorian cloaking technology had been perfected over thousands of years. No species had ever developed a counter to it. Human scientists cracked it in 8 days. By day 9, human children in the underground bunkers were building detection devices from household appliances. They called them ghost finders and turned it into a game, competing to spot the most cloaked soldiers. Valorian armor was designed to stop any projectile weapon in the galaxy. Human engineers studied captured suits and discovered weaknesses within weeks. They built new weapons specifically designed to exploit those weaknesses, manufacturing them in underground factories and distributing them through tunnel networks. Every advantage the Valorians brought to the battlefield, the humans found a way to neutralize. It was as if their entire species was designed for one purpose: solving the problem of how to kill things that were trying to kill them. The fourth anomaly defied all logic. Humans were insane. Valorian psychologists analyzed human culture and concluded that the species suffered from collective madness. They consumed poison for recreation, chemicals that damaged their organs and clouded their judgment. They called this drinking. They climbed mountains for no reason other than because the mountains existed. They strapped themselves to controlled explosions and called it fun. They had invented a game where they threw themselves out of perfectly functional aircraft and fell toward the ground at terminal velocity, opening a thin piece of fabric at the last moment to slow their descent. They did this for entertainment. A species that does this for pleasure, one psychologist wrote, will not hesitate to do far worse when angry. The fifth anomaly arrived on 4 legs and changed everything. Valorian soldiers began reporting attacks by creatures they could not identify. The creatures were fast and silent, with sharp teeth and an incredible sense of smell. They could detect cloaked soldiers through 3 feet of concrete. They attacked without fear and without hesitation. And they fought until they were killed. The humans called them dogs. Further research revealed that dogs were descendants of wolves, one of the most dangerous predators on the human homeworld. Thousands of years ago, humans had somehow convinced these predators to join them. They had bred them for loyalty, for intelligence, for the specific purpose of helping humans hunt. They did not just survive their predators, a Valorian biologist wrote. They domesticated them. They turned their enemies into weapons. What kind of species does this? The answer came from an unexpected source. A Valorian patrol captured a human soldier, a young woman named Sarah Chun. She was wounded and exhausted, but she refused to give up any useful information. The interrogators tried everything, every technique that had broken prisoners from 100 different species. Sarah Chun smiled at them and said nothing. Finally, in frustration, the lead interrogator asked her a simple question. Why do you keep fighting? You cannot win. Your species is outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched. Logic demands that you surrender. Sarah Chun laughed. It was not a happy sound. You want to know why we fight? She said. Look at your own reports. You call us illogical. You call us insane. You say we don't value our own lives. She leaned forward, her eyes bright despite her wounds. You're right. We don't. Because we spent 100,000 years being afraid. Afraid of the dark. Afraid of the cold. Afraid of the things with claws and teeth that wanted to eat us. She smiled again, and this time, the interrogator felt something he had never felt before. Fear. And then we decided to stop being afraid, Sarah said. We decided to be the thing that everything else was afraid of. Every monster that hunted us, we hunted them back. Every disease that killed us, we cured it. Every disaster that destroyed us, we rebuilt and we came back stronger. She looked at the interrogator with something like pity. You think you're predators, she said. You think you're the monsters. But you've never met anything like us. You've never fought something that was forged in fear and came out the other side as fury. The interrogator ended the session and submitted his report. His recommendation was simple. Request immediate withdrawal. This species cannot be conquered. They can only be destroyed. I'm not certain we can do that either. High Command ignored the recommendation. 3 months later, the humans launched their first attack on Valorian space. The war had only just begun. 18 months after the war began, the galaxy changed forever. It started with a single ship. The vessel was ugly and crude, built from stolen Valorian parts welded to human engineering. It shook and groaned as it moved through hyperspace. Its navigation systems were unreliable. Its life support was held together with tape and prayers. None of that mattered. What mattered was that the ship appeared in Valorian space, 4,000 light-years from Earth, and launched 12 missiles at a fuel depot before anyone could react. The depot exploded in a ball of fire visible from 3 systems away. The ship vanished back into hyperspace before the Valorians could respond. No one survived to report what had happened. But the Valorians knew. Somehow, impossibly, the humans had learned to travel faster than light. Ambassador Zethkan received the news in his private chambers on the Hegemony homeworld. He'd been confident that the war would end soon, that the humans would eventually exhaust their resources and their will to fight. Now he stared at the reports and felt something cold settle in his chest. They reverse-engineered our drives, his aide explained. Their scientists studied the wreckage from downed ships. They should not have been able to understand the technology. Our hyperdrives require principles of physics their species has not yet discovered. And yet they fly, Zethkan said. Yes, Ambassador. They fly. Over the next 6 months, human attacks spread across Valorian space like a disease. The humans did not send invasion fleets. They did not have the numbers for that. Instead, they sent small ships crewed by volunteers who knew they would probably not return home. They called themselves the Void Wolves. The Void Wolves attacked supply lines and destroyed shipyards. They hit communication relays and fuel stations. They struck military bases and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. Each attack was small, almost insignificant. But there were dozens of attacks every week, then hundreds. Valorian strategists tried to predict where the humans would strike next. They failed. The humans did not follow patterns. They did not use logic. They simply found weaknesses and exploited them, accepting losses that would have broken any other species. A Valorian admiral calculated the casualty rates the humans were accepting. They lose 90% of their pilots on some missions, he reported. No rational species would accept these numbers. His superior asked, "Are they winning?" The admiral was silent for a long moment. "Yes," he finally said. "They are winning." On the occupied world of Kareth Prime, a species called the Rilsith had lived under Valorian rule for 3,000 years. They had forgotten what freedom felt like. They had accepted their place in the hierarchy of the galaxy. Then they started receiving transmissions. The transmissions came from human ships passing through nearby systems. They were simple messages, repeated in every language the humans had learned to translate. The messages said, "You do not have to win. You just have to make victory cost more than it is worth." The Rilsith listened, and they began to remember what their ancestors had known before the Valorians came, that even prey could bite back. The first Rilsith uprising caught the Valorians completely by surprise. It was small and easily crushed, but it was followed by another, and another. Soon the Rilsith were using human tactics, hiding in tunnel networks, planting explosives, refusing to surrender. The same thing happened on a dozen other worlds. The Amani, the Kethver, the Tresic, species that had been broken for generations, suddenly found their courage again. They had been shown that resistance was possible, that the Valorians could bleed, that the mighty could fall. The humans had given them something more dangerous than weapons. They had given them hope, Zethkan ordered the capture of a human pilot. He needed to understand. He needed to know why. The pilot was a young woman named Maya Torres. Her ship had crashed into a Valorian fuel depot on the colony world of Vethamela. She had destroyed the depot and killed 200 Valorian soldiers. She should have died in the crash. Instead, she had survived, badly wounded but alive. Zethkan visited her in the medical facility where she was being held. She was small, even by human standards. Her body was covered in burns and broken bones. Medical machines kept her alive, pumping drugs into her blood to dull the pain. She smiled when she saw him. "Ambassador," she said, "I was hoping I'd meet you." Zethkan studied her with all his eyes. "I do not understand your species," he said. "You could have negotiated. You could have paid tribute and lived as subjects. Your world would have survived. Your people would have been protected. Why did you choose this?" Maya laughed, though it clearly caused her pain. "Protected? Like the Rilsith? Like the Yamani? Living as slaves, told what to think and where to go and how to serve." She shook her head. "That's not living. That's just dying slowly. But you are dying now. Your world burns. Your people suffer. Your species may not survive this war." "Maybe," Maya agreed. "But we'll die on our feet, fighting for something we believe in. And you know what? That's more than most species ever get." She looked at him with eyes that held no fear, only a fierce and burning pride. "You made a mistake, Ambassador. You looked at us and saw something soft and weak. You saw a species that was young and primitive and afraid. But we've been killing each other over imaginary lines on maps for 10,000 years. We survived ice ages and plagues and weapons that split atoms. We are the monsters our ancestors told stories about." She grinned bloody and bright, "And now we're your problem." Zethkan left the medical facility and returned to his chambers. He looked at the reports flooding in from across the hegemony. Attacks on 3 more supply lines. Another uprising on Kareth Prime. 2 more species, beginning to show signs of resistance. The humans were not just fighting a war. They were starting a revolution, for the first time in 60,000 years. Zethkan wondered if the hegemony could survive. He thought about Maya Torres, about the fire in her eyes, about the smile on her broken face. He thought about a species that would rather die than kneel, and he began to understand that some prey were more dangerous than any predator. 3 years after the declaration of subjugation, Ambassador Zethkan returned to the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Concord. He walked slowly now, his shell cracked in places that had never healed properly. The war had aged him in ways that Valorians were not supposed to age. The chamber was different than he remembered. The same crystal walls, the same floating displays, the same rows of seats climbing toward the shadowed ceiling. But the species filling those seats looked at him differently now. Where once there had been fear and respect, now there was something else. They were watching him the way prey watches a wounded predator. Zethkan took his place at the center of the chamber and looked up at the assembled representatives. He saw the Rilsith delegation, larger now than it had been 3 years ago. He saw the Amani and the Kethver and a dozen other species that had risen up against Valorian rule. They no longer paid tribute. They no longer bowed. The hegemony had lost 18 colony worlds, not to human conquest, but to rebellion. Species that had been broken for millennia had found their courage. They had learned human tactics, human strategies, human stubbornness. They had learned that even the mighty could fall, and Earth still stood. The planet was scarred. The population had been cut in half. Cities that had stood for centuries were now ruins filled with radiation and fire. But the humans had not surrendered. They had not begged for mercy. They had fought for every meter of ground, every building, every life. Now they were rebuilding. just as they had always rebuilt Dot in the observation gallery. Dr. Elena Vasquez sat in the same seat she had occupied 3 years ago. She was older now, her hair completely gray, her face lined with exhaustion and grief. But her eyes had lost that tired look. Something had replaced it, something hard and bright and unbreakable. Dot. She was no longer a xenanthropologist attending as an observer. She was the official representative of the Terran Confederacy, and she had come to witness the end of a war. Zethkon looked up at her. She looked back at him without fear. "The Valorian hegemony," Zethkon announced, his voice carrying across the silent chamber, "requests a formal armistice with the species known as humanity." The words echoed off the crystal walls. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Then, slowly, a murmur began to spread through the chamber. It grew louder, becoming something like amazement, something like hope. The Valorians were surrendering. Not completely, of course. The hegemony still controlled most of its territory. It was still the most powerful force in the galaxy. But it was no longer invincible. It could no longer simply crush any species that defied it. The humans had proven that resistance was possible, and that lesson had spread to every corner of the cosmos. The armistice was negotiated over several hours. When it was finished, humanity had gained recognition as a sovereign species, full membership in the Galactic Concord, and the right to govern its own affairs without Valorian interference. In exchange, the humans agreed to stop broadcasting their message of resistance to subjugated worlds. It was not a victory, not by any traditional measure. Earth was devastated. Millions were dead. The scars would take generations to heal, but they had not lost. And for humanity, that was enough. After the ceremonies concluded, Zethkon made his way to the observation gallery. Elena watched him approach, her expression calm, her hands folded in her lap. She did not stand to greet him. "I must understand," he said, his translator struggling with concepts it had never needed to express. "Your species is young, fragile. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no venom. You evolved as prey on a world filled with predators. How did you become this?" Elena considered the question. She had thought about it many times over the past 3 years, lying awake in bunkers while the world burned above her. She had searched for an answer that would make sense to a species like the Valorians, a species that had never known fear. "You evolved as apex predators," she finally said. "Everything on your world was afraid of you. You never had to be afraid of anything." She stood and gathered her notes, the same way she had 3 years ago. "We evolved afraid," she continued. "Afraid of the dark. Afraid of the cold. Afraid of the things with claws and teeth that wanted to eat us. For 100,000 years, we were prey. Every day was a struggle to survive. Every night was a battle against the things that hunted us." She met his compound eyes, and Zethkon saw something there that he had never seen in any species before. It was not hatred. It was not anger. It was something older and deeper. Something that had been forged in caves and sharpened on the bones of extinct monsters. "And then we decided we didn't want to be prey anymore," Elena said. "We clawed our way to the top of our food chain with rocks and fire and sheer, stubborn spite. Every monster that hunted us, we made them extinct. Every disease that killed us, we found cures. Every disaster that tried to destroy us, we adapted, rebuilt, and came back stronger." She smiled, and Zethkon understood at last why his soldiers had reported that human smiles were a threat display. "You made one mistake, Ambassador," she said. "You looked at us and saw a soft species without claws or venom or armor. You saw prey." She turned to leave. "You never stopped to ask what kind of prey survives 100,000 years of everything trying to kill it." She walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. At the door, she paused and looked back. "We're survivors, Ambassador. The kind that bite back. And now the whole galaxy knows it." Elena Vasquez left the Grand Chamber and returned to her ship. In the observation window, Earth appeared as a small blue dot against the endless black. Scarred but unbroken, wounded but alive, she thought about her daughter, who had survived the war and was now helping rebuild the surface cities. She thought about all the humans who had died so that others might live. She thought about the message they had broadcast across the stars, the one that had inspired rebellions and revolutions, the one that had changed the galaxy forever. You do not have to win. You just have to make victory cost more than it is worth. Behind her, the representatives of 847 species watched humanity take its seat on the Galactic Concorde. Not as subjects, not as conquerors, but as something the cosmos had never seen. The 4-dot survivors thought the kind that the universe had tried to kill for 100,000 years. The kind that refused to die. Elena smiled as her ship began the long journey home. The stars stretched out before her, infinite and cold and beautiful. Once, her ancestors had looked up at those stars and wondered if they were alone. Now the galaxy knew the answer, it was not alone. And it never would be again, because humanity had arrived, and humanity was here to stay.